Welcome everybody to a very, very special daily podcast. We have a special guest with us. We have flown him 6,000 miles from Maxis in California.
No you haven't, he's on Skye.
Shh, not now Ed. It's only the big tuna himself. It's Chris Schmidt. The Sims are very excited, as you can tell. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Hello, how are you all doing?
We have like a million questions to get through, but we don't have time for a million questions. So we're going to focus on the upcoming Update 6. But before we get to Update 6, I want to know a little bit about you. For the guys who don't know you so well, what is your role at Maxis and what does it involve?
So I'm one of the game designers. My job basically was to focus on the gameplay balance, integrating the work that Stone did and bringing it all together, making sure that the game was playable for as much of the development process as possible, and then also working with Little Tuna, Ross Trays on finishing it up towards the end of the project.
When we're talking about balance, I mean, can you give me an example of the kind of thing that you would be balancing?
So, for example, I needed to know how many people were going to work, how long they were going to be there, a rough guesstimation of how long it would take for them to get to and from work, just to get some initial numbers in there, because literally everything in the game really comes down to numbers. Every time something happens, we've got some number defining that, and the distance that fire trucks will travel in order to get to the fire before the fire burns down, that sort of thing.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, Update 6. So, what's the big focus in Update 6?
Update 6 is all about RCI, trying to address some of the concerns that the community had, make a sort of a better integration between industrial and commercial so that it really felt like sort of a meteor relationship.
Now, RCI has obviously been a really big talking point on the forums. How much were you influenced by the discussions on the forums, and how much has this been driven by the player base?
We definitely saw that there was a lot of people who were really interested in seeing something like this come into play. So I dived in a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. I dived in to talk to people about what they wanted and talk about the types of changes we were interested in doing. Got to see some interesting ideas. A lot of them couldn't work for a variety of reasons, but we took that feedback and we did actually make a few little changes based off of what people were expecting.
I guess for anybody that doesn't know, we're talking about RCI, which is residential, commercial, industrial. So can you explain how RCI is changing? How does it work now, or what's the big thing that is changing in how it works now to how it's going to work in Update 6?
In the previous versions, industry needed to be able to deliver to commercial, but commercial wasn't bothered about whether or not they were receiving shipments in a timely fashion. They just would consume the goods, and the industrial would prosper as long as they had places to deliver. So now what we've done is we've added a link between the two, where going back the other way, so now commercial will get sad, and they'll start complaining if they're not regularly receiving freight shipments, and eventually they could go abandoned if enough things are going wrong, their unhappiness gets high enough, they'll just go abandoned. And so we added freight as one of the factors that determines whether or not it is happy.
Now, when you say that the commercial will get sad and potentially become abandoned, now does that mean that RC cities, so just residential and commercial only cities, will that not work in Update 6, or is that still a viable option?
It should still be a viable option. So the amount of sadness that they're going to be receiving due to a lack of shipments, provided that you don't have a neighbor who's able to provide you with your freight, which is still an option. But yes, it is possible. You just will have to slightly change up the way you play. You may need to run with reduced taxes on commercial to make them happy in response to the extra sadness that they're getting. We didn't want to put in something that was going to just wreck people who had existing residential and commercial cities, right away. So that's part of the reason why we actually went with the direction that we did, was so that we could softly introduce people into this new environment.
I have to say, I actually like this change, or I should say, I like the way that you've implemented this change, because industry is now necessary, and of course, with industry comes pollution, and the RC only option is still there, but you've introduced that penalty. You've either got to drop your taxes. Actually, do you have any other tips? So taxes is one. I've tried introducing tourism, and the addition of tourists seems to help. Any other ways that we can promote an RC only?
I mean, those are really the two big ones. Tourists have always added additional money to commercial buildings, and so in cities which have a lot of tourism, whenever the tourists visit the commercial buildings, they receive profit as though they had just a regular shopper going in. Since that was on top of their existing shopper load, you could really see an explosion in your commercial if you did it right. So, yeah, tourism is definitely a viable option. The taxes are a viable option. Those are really the two big ones.
Now, you mentioned getting freight from a neighbour. This is something that I think a lot of the player base have been talking about for quite some time. And this kind of goes back to the original vision of having multiple cities which are interactive, and you've maybe got an RC city and an RI city, and the industry is feeding to the commercial in another city. So how does that work in Update 6?
Works largely the same. We did actually increase the number of freight trucks at the industrial buildings to also help increase the reliability of their shipments. It should be a little bit more viable. We have more trucks that will actually make the deliveries, so there shouldn't be as much of a downtime between when they exit your border and when they come back. So that should help keep your industrial focused cities working well, and that should also increase the supply side. So it should balance out pretty well.
Now, talking of balancing, and you are the balancing expert, I know that there are a number of players out there, I mean a fair number of players, who've had issues or have expressed concerns about the balancing of the freight supply demand. So balancing freight against the freight orders in the details tab. Has that changed in Update 6?
It absolutely has changed in Update 6. We actually we made some pretty significant overhauls. We've increased the reliability by increasing the number of delivery trucks. We also changed the production and consumption rates and amounts. So now the I-bar should be a lot more responsive. It should be a much clearer guide for you to be able to maintain a balance. We've just sort of smoothed out the rough edges a little bit, and we think that it works a lot better.
And having played with it, I have to say, it is now a lot easier to balance that equation. I have tried, I have had to play around with it, and it is a lot easier now. I'm glad you mentioned the demand bars, because this again is something that players, I mean, they've been pretty vocal about the demand bars not being a true reflection. So we can now say that these are going to be a much more accurate reflection of the true demand within the city.
Absolutely.
Actually, something I saw today, somebody was talking about the demand, the RCI demand bars also reflecting regional as well as sort of citywide demand.
The bars do have so the lighter color behind the bright color is actually your neighbor's demand. Ever since the very beginning, they've always been reflective of what your neighbors are looking for.
That's something that I think is kind of a little bit of a secret. I don't think people are really aware that that's what that indicates. You mentioned that there are going to be additional freight delivery vehicles. Mm-hmm. I know that one of the concerns that people have had about introducing industry as a needed component is the additional traffic that might bring. Do you think that's going to be a concern?
I really don't think so. It's kind of a drop in the bucket. They were already doing a lot of that stuff. They were already making deliveries to commercial buildings. We haven't really changed that at all. We've just doubled the number, and that's going from like probably 20 or 30 trucks to 40 or 60 trucks. It's just a drop in the bucket.
Now, one thing that, and this is something that I've actually talked about before on a podcast, is having an alternative. So that, let's say you want an RC city, you don't want to have industry in that particular city. An alternative way of being able to get freight, and one of the suggestions has been to be able to either buy or import freight. Is that something that you guys have talked about or considered at all?
Well, we've definitely considered it and talked about it, but it's not a solution that we're really looking at this time. It's a lot of work, and it's a little bit out of scope for our timetable. The
problem that I sort of came up with is, okay, so you import it, mm-hmm. but it's not like a resource that's maybe going to a few factories. I mean, the distribution of it would be quite an issue, right?
You've only got up to, say, 4 or so trucks, and you need to find some way of adding more trucks to it. You need to find some way of balancing it out, figuring out things like, so the people who are producing freight are already getting money for producing freight. If they sell it on the global market, do they get additional money for selling their freight? I mean, there's a lot of unanswered questions there from a design perspective that there wasn't enough of a benefit to really explore too far.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I sort of came up with and thought, hey, that'd be a great idea, but when you start to actually look at it, it actually becomes quite a complex issue.
Yeah, it's definitely something that would require a lot of thought before we could put anything like that in, if we were to decide to do that. But at this point, we're not really looking at it.
Okay. So, Update 6 is obviously going to be the big one for RCI. Are there any plans for more RCI changes in the future?
At this point, we're not really looking at doing another patch that's specifically focused on RCI. Of course, we'll do any bug fixes, possibly some other minor improvements, but this is really the big one for RCI for the time being. We're sort of spreading ourselves out, trying to look at various different other parts of the game that we can improve, and we feel like we've made some significant improvements for RCI, so we can start looking at some of the other stuff further down the line.
Now, I've had a look at the in development patch notes, and I also have the privilege of being in the dev test, so I see the things that are going on in there. But to your mind, what are the other highlights of Update 6?
Really, the biggest one is that we've made some progress towards fixing the out of money issue. It's not quite entirely resolved, but we've got a couple of things in there.
I am gonna have to throw the hallelujah music in at that point because although it's not the biggest issue out there, I think it's one of the most annoying issues to a lot of the players. So this is good news. So what exactly have we addressed in this one?
We had some issues where vehicles were having a hard time getting out of the buildings in a timely fashion, and especially with some of the higher density buildings, vehicles were getting stuck in their internal garages, which was an escalating problem.
Like a lot of people out there will be going, internal garages? We didn't even know there were internal garages. I didn't know before I started playing around with Update 6.
Yep.
So did they actually like mimic having an internal garage? The cars are actually queued up, ready to come out?
They are in fact queued up, ready to come out. So there's just basically, as the vehicles are released from the building, they'll get into line, and as the cars can come out and get onto the road, they'll just start heading out. We had some internal issues, something that we were able to resolve.
So what was the impact of that? How would we actually see that impact us in the game?
What would end up happening is you'd have commercial building with a bunch of shoppers queued up inside, but the commercial building would still be receiving shoppers, so the commercial building would be doing fine. But you'd see, out of money, or various other things where like the shoppers weren't returning home or the workers weren't returning home, which was a part of the nebulous out of money issue. So you should see in your higher density cities an improvement in the performance there. There should be less out of money abandonment on that scale.
That's excellent. I mean, seriously, anything that goes further towards the ultimate goal of just getting rid of anything that's not a real out-of-money problem is just such good news. Okay, so what other highlights?
Oh, we've also got some general UI improvements. There's some improvements to the garbage UI, so you'll get a better sense of how you're doing as far as picking up garbage. And we've also added a neighborhood system. So basically, you're less likely to end up with a neighborhood where you've got a high wealth building next to a wealth 1 building just because there was a little bit of space there.
So does that mean that that's going to leave just like gaps, or will you use fillers?
You'll probably see more fillers, but it'll definitely improve the visual look of it.
Excellent. Anything else we should know about?
I think that's pretty much it.
There was one I've got to pick you up on. There was one which I was so pleased to see, and this is where, because this drove me crazy. I believe there's a bug fix to where shoppers weren't able to return home when their happiness was full or something. And what this led to was the mass exodus of shoppers leaving the city, right?
Yes, that was a particularly odd bug, but yes, that one should be resolved, I believe.
I've got to say, you know, that particularly if you've got a city with a single lane entrance, the elimination of that one, oh, that's going to make a lot of people happy. So, like, if it was me, I would say that's one of the highlights for sure. So, while I've got you here, when am I getting my goddamn palm trees? Okay, Chris, I know we've got limited time. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
No problem, anytime.
Oh, in that case, I'll have you back. For definite.
I'm looking forward to it.
Alright, man. Go do more wonderful things, fix stuff, make us happy, and hopefully we'll see you very soon.
I hope so too.
And to the rest of you guys, peace out.